Hello everyone, thank you for joining us this morning for this roundtable. We will talk about data classification with AI. So yes, we are joining two very important topics today. One, historical data classification. I guess we have all tried to work and wonder. We've met some issues with the volume of data that we had to classify, the type of data we had to classify. And today we are seeing new possibilities with AI. We can hear all around about AI, and we little by little see the concrete aspect about this topic. And this is what we are going to talk about this morning. We have several speakers, as you can see. I will introduce myself, Jérôme Billois from Wavestone Cabinet. I will be your moderator. I will first start to ask to my speakers to introduce themselves. For the questions at the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A, so please note them down on paper, on your phone, as you prefer, so we can take it at the very end of this presentation. I will give the floor on my right, and let's begin. Hello everyone, Benjamin Nathan. I am a technical enablement lead at Bigid. A bit specific, but I am in charge of everything related to technical training. And big ID is a solution of complete platform for data security and data governance and compliance. Hello everyone, Antoine Bajolet, administrator of CLUSIF and coordinator of the RSSI group of CLUSIF. If you don't know this association, we are very active in cybersecurity. Mathieu Duponchel, one of the partners for Forvis Mazar, in charge of cybersecurity for data protection. Christophe Palkoffer for Absid and Ionos as an SSE, and I've been working for more than 30 years in cyber to talk about a sovereign cloud. Simon Bernard, I am a lawyer, founder of a modern law for AI questions, and I was also an advisor for the former Prime Minister Elizabeth Borne. Thank you all for your introduction. So as you can see, we have all kinds of speakers, because we know that data classification can cover legal, technical. So maybe to open up the debate, Antoine, you will work in the name of the CLUSIF. You are exchanging with a lot of cyber experts. You are an expert yourself. Maybe you can come back on this idea of needs of classification as you see it today. Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jérôme. Well, what we can see today in terms of needs of RSSI for data protection is to establish which data should be accessible or transferred and to whom, and for this we need to classify it. The problem is, as we know, that despite all the recommendation mandatory for the users to use one specific label for their data or documents, it is very difficult. And it works so. And on the other hand, the classic tools of data classification based mainly on schema recognition, expressions, well, their performance, we have to admit, are a bit weak, with a lot of false positive. And eventually, whether through humans or through automation, to say if it's classified or public or secret, and to base tools on data leak prevention, it does not work, or not very well. I guess we have all experienced this. Benjamin, this question of false positive is very close to your heart. Yes, and to come back on what Antoine was saying, for the classification, for the manual aspect, it's something that have been lasting for years. It is a real pain for us because even giants like Microsoft try to introduce this notion as classification in 2003 for Office, and we can see that 20 years later it's still not okay. So the automated aspect and AI questions to be sure that classification beyond the regular expression use, which is a traditional use, can help us to reduce this false positive on classification platforms for structural data, where it is a bit easier because we can quickly identify columns in data, but also for non-structured data, the documents generated by the users on an everyday basis. We have to be sure to be as relevant as possible, to be more effective to protect data. Let's ask the room. Today we know that we have several ways to ask the users to classify their data. So I will ask you 3 questions because I saw just 3 methods. So one is extreme, to say, okay, I cannot save a document on Word if it is not classified. Some companies work this way. Is there someone in the room working this way? A few, okay. Then we have people who have labels and one to encourage people to label or to classify their documents. Who is working this way in the room? A few. And then I guess for the rest, you all have one specific classification policy that you are supposed to do, and no one is reminding you to use this way. Okay, thank you for participating. This way we can see a bit, get the temperature. Christophe, I guess you have also an experience on document classification that you have experienced. Yes, by the time for air security in Europe, 27 countries, 27 different engineer families, a bit chaotic. The industry has its own standards, and all of this trying to classify in one agency everything that was classified in one agency. The issue was that we had to put in classification schemes, names, and eventually the only solution that we had by the time, before the next topic, was manual. It was the only way. Say we cannot save anything, cannot send anything if it's not saved. Yes, it is one of the cases that we mentioned. Simon, would you like to add something? Yes. Just to justify why we are here, and the interest of what you do is that today we have 2 approaches in the same time. A multiplication on the one hand of data, and a multiplication of rules around classification and treatment for data. For example, for Cyber, Data Act, Governance Act. AI can be a solution to answer to this need of classification. There is also part of the issue because AI creates new issues with a big quantity of data learning, but also the data that we put into a generative AI on new governance modes for data spaces, for example, of lack of data, that could reinforce this need of classification. And Matthew, maybe one last word about this topic. If we introduce a new dimension and mention also the RGBD and privacy by design, we can see that we have some issues today to define for all the project and all the more for the history for labeling data, private data. And AI through automation can implement, since the very beginning, it may have the capacity to treat this legacy and new documents related to data privacy. It may seem a bit an old topic, but it still is very important today. I confirm what you just said. So I guess that we have seen the issue is not simple, but are there some solutions, some evolutions that could help us to get out of this hole? Antoine, I guess you have an experience to share? Yes, once again, RSSI are very imaginative. With limited means, we tend to find solutions, and we can see that for those among us, for example, that we know that we copied Microsoft, and an automatic meeting summary on Teams. Teams and Copilot will be able to classify all the details of this meeting. So if we go further and say, okay, if we feed to a generative AI my full categories of classification with the different labels, and I put it into with my documents, it could work. And generative AI might be able to classify all my documents in pre-established categories. For those who have experienced, that we can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I can confirm you can all try with your LLM of companies not to leak any data. And we can see that this LLM have the capacity to understand the context and the meaning of a document. So we can, and Christophe, you wanted to mention a concept, LCM, that goes beyond the LLM? LLM, we all know it. It's very simple, working on the shape, the form. LCM goes beyond in the meaning. You have three types of documents. For the legal documents, with if the LM does not have the experience, it would be very dumb. Simple. They need to learn. The LCM will go deeper in the meaning, trying to understand every word and the dependencies, and the learning is a lot more interesting. And moreover, and I do insist, there is a lot of LCM already here on the market, sovereign. Second time I insist on this topic. American product with data lakes, it does not respect the regulations, Homeland, Cloud Act. So I think that this approach has a better future. We cannot say that LCM is the solution to everything. It is a combination of agents, of API, LLM, and LCM. And this way we can go further. And I talk with my personal experience. 1.5 beta tried with 98% of success. And don't you worry, the interpreters know the difference for 90. Benjamin, you've worked a lot about LLM and how we can make it a bit smarter, because sometimes LLMs are reaching their limits. Yes, actually, for the issue for LLM beyond the potential data leaks and the different languages existing with the cloud, is that we have to use this solution on for a good end to understand the context. And when we work on classification and when we implement process, we feed the LLM with the content of the company to be able to identify more precisely the different categories that we will implement for tag or label documents of the company. And that's where the LLM will really add an additional layer to really learn quickly beyond historic model machine learnings. They will try to look for information within a context, and we will be able to use these capacities. It is totally possible to use LLM in a sovereign cloud or in a prime environment, implementing the right resources to really feed this capacity. You also mentioned the fact that we can train our LLM with documents using the users or the DSI to improve the LLM. Yes, totally. You can use what we call RAG. This way we can feed and enrich the LLM upstream. And also with the context. When you create the prompt of the request, you can propose documents of reference to create a context depending on these documents. And that's why it is a lot more interesting, because we know what is happening and we can help the LLMs to get information. That's what we try to do. Then we can classify all the information. Yes, for the users, we can see if it's well classified or not. That's how we improve the system. Thank you. Christophe, I think that you have one last word to say about this topic. For the toolbox of AI, we have to put the right tools at the right place. Yes, just to give you a bit of context, we talk about data, AI, but above all, we talk about cognitive security, normal cybersecurity. It's a 12 pillars, including AI, with all the legal aspects. Each tool has their strength, their weaknesses. LCM is great, but needs more energy. Quite hard to handle at the beginning. We have this need to forget. There is a lot of things to take into account, and we cannot just keep on this point of view as data, AI, cloud. No, that's why I talk about cognitive security. And this cognitive security is a toolbox full of tools that we need to know how to use. You cannot take any tool for any task. That won't work. Simple as that. And don't try if you don't take into account all the layers. And I'm not talking about OC, sorry. I talk about EVOPs up to the end of the life cycle. You have to include everything. I didn't think we would talk about OC model, but good job. Get back to the basics of network as we used to practice it years ago. About the stakes and the good practices, Antoine, maybe you have some things to share with the audience? Yes, of course. And it was already mentioned by Christophe. AI for classification has risks. We have a new data support, and the way we store data in a cognitive network, it is a bit complicated, especially for non-specialists. And these data, with the model of all the data to classify for the company, so we are the highest level of sensitivity, and the model that was trained for your company will have a high level or the highest level of sensitivity for data. So you can classify the data, but you can also extract it for the company. And as we said, privacy by design, it is the right to forget. So if I train my model on private data, how can I extract it beyond the preservation time? And where the data are localized? If you take the article 19.6 of Sentence Cloud, will I have the right to use these kind of models? You have to ask yourself this kind of question. We shouldn't have more risk by using one tool. Yes, it's a double sharp sword. Simone, a few words? Yes, and what Antoine said is really clear in law. It is data treatment, and you have to be very careful because there is a lot of risk of misuse and mispreservation of data. And to insist a bit more about the sovereignty question that we mentioned, also we talk about trust cloud before sovereign cloud. We have to think about it. When you create your classification, when you will implement AI to help to classify, and I think that at this moment you have to be precise and talk about semi-automation of classification rather than fully automated. Yes, with the human in the loop concept that are very important in AI. You can trust the AI until some point. Yes, because behind you have the question of accountability. And these questions still have to be defined with, because there are still a lot of dark areas, because AI is it's just the beginning of AI. So, yes, we mentioned the autonomy of AI, but also localization, where these systems will be put, where data will be transferred, because when you classify it, you have to transfer a content. Benjamin, I think that you had some things to share with us with this capacity for some systems to be on premise with a higher control of the company. Yes, you can develop and use models, LLM models on premise applications, and to develop this learning method. But you need to control also what is happening from the machine learning and AI and LLM side. You need to scan the models and to understand what was used to create these models, to be sure that they will be used for a good use and not to spread out information of the company. LLM will learn HR sensitive documents for financial data, something that you don't want to share with everyone. But even though you still have the control, you need to understand what was created before sharing it. And it is one of the stakes in terms of technology, to understand what is happening at the level of the model, of the data used for the training. Maybe you can clean it up upstream. So some people say that you should do a cleanup before implementing your software, but once it is launched, you need to understand what is happening inside. And one of the things we work on is to really scan it from the inside and understand how it works before sharing the information, to be able to protect the data by cleaning up or by suppressing it. Yes, these models today are a bit black boxes. They do a lot of work on the explainability, understanding, and traceability of the model. And for some technology, it is quite complicated. Maybe in the future we could imagine attacks of cyber criminals that could go inside the model and to change the way it's working, saying, okay, this is not classified as sensitive, it is public, and all of a sudden it will change the access rights to the files. Yes, of course, yes, we have to keep the control. Yes, and just to mention the future, the big issue is to control the answers to the prompt, what will be sent to the user beyond the right of the file. If the LLM answers a pre-visualization of the content with, for example, very sensitive data like very confidential or political context or intellectual property, then yes, it is complicated because the document won't be accessible. But if the LLM proposes information from the document because he does not care about the authorization, yes, we have an issue. And I guess you've all observed it when we use chatbot today for text or image generation. We can see that we have a beginning of an answer with information, and all of a sudden they say, no, oops, I'm doing a mistake, and they're erasing it. It's a bit late, because if you are fast on taking screenshots, you can take from some information. Christophe, you wanted to say a bit more about this topic with the right to forget. It's not easy. Yes, it is very complex because we are with a different model and vectors. And when we are into a very complex model with 1 or 2 millions of vectors, of multi-dimensions. We're out of the spin. It is a real nightmare to maintain. So we have to take into account that today we talk about AI, data AI, which we are all exposed to European and national directives. Chapter 1 and 2 are already implemented, so the right to be able to explain the model and traceability. We have TOA, NIS, Cyber Act, a long list. You cannot just get one point of view, you have to take all of it. And all of it, it's the life cycle, the complete life cycle of an infrastructure, of an app, of data, all of it. You cannot silo it anymore. Otherwise, you'll be vulnerable. And we mentioned all the possible attacks today. We have 191 cases, Chinese cases to attack AIs. So it's a whole new level. Yes, of course, AI will be able to help us to protect and to understand the text. Matthew, maybe you wanted to conclude on this topic? Yes, talking about AI, we quickly think about what Christophe mentioned. Also, if we think about the LGBT, we need to stay on the path with impact analysis that we have to keep updated. We mentioned the evolution of algorithms, but it's also interesting whether there are attacks or not, to be sure that the algorithm is still working correctly and that there isn't any issue in the answers, and for sensitive documents that they remain sensitive and they remain classified. And also there are some governance topics with the training and mastery parts. For the training, we talk about double training on the users. The users still have to be accountable. If you ask yourself the nature of the document you have to be able to understand, you have to be sure that you classify it correctly and checking the classification, otherwise we have different risks. So yes, we have to train the users that have to be accountable too. And once you keep it in mind, we also have the training for control. First line, second line, third line, to be sure that we have a second or a third look on all the controls that we want to implement.
Simon? I would like to come back on what was just said. I would like to say that preventing is not avoiding, but being able to react when a potential attack takes place. First, it's important for your resilience of your activity, and then the possible actions in justice. And the stakes might be high because there is an insurance issue which is important and the demands are high. So if you haven't done what was necessary to anticipate things, it's just as when you marry. Well, when you marry, you have to anticipate things. I'm not sure this sentence will be kept as a conclusion. If you want to marry, you have to prepare your wedding. That's what I would have expected, but you might be right. Anyway, if we try an open perspective, maybe not as personal, but on the use, we talked a lot about classification. It's a good thing to classify documents. We have labels, but couldn't we go further? Because it should be related to a level of protection, to detection, to reactions. And in such context, it may involve different players. So you may also have the legal and HR people involved. I'm going to ask you all about this topic, but do you see openings, prospects that will help us accelerate all these topics? with AI. Benjamin, maybe? Well, the real issue today is that when you talk classification, you talk about non-structured data, documents generated by users, data that come from the cloud, such as Microsoft 365, or clouds that may be shared and accessible to all. That was the objective of this, was to simplify collaboration, but simplification of collaboration involves a risk. And when you talk about regulation issues, with all these elements, when you do classification, you have to take into account structured data from the companies, and that's important to have an holistic view on the whole of data. As an employee or client of this or that company, when I connect on their website to exercise my right to be forgotten, well, I will have a series of HR data in a recruitment process, for instance, or my name, my birth date, etc. So there are issues related to other types of database. How do we do when we use AI to learn and classify this data to make sure, if you do not have this global view, to be able to clean if need be, to understand how these data will be used. So that's a real issue that companies are facing currently. Each provider will tell you their solution is the best. It's logical. But the real issue is to know what happens. I'm going to tell you I use LLM, and I work with NVIDIA, providing solutions that will work on premise. But you may tell me I use LLM and we have a 100% success rate, which is not possible. But on the other hand, I'll be able to tell you how you will be able to refine this and to fine-tune it. If it's totally structured, you will lose part of the information of the company. So you need to extend this. And for regulatory issue, you have to know where the data are and how do they transit before the different regional issues that are GPD in Europe. But there are many, many rules. Antoine, would you like to add something and maybe close and so that we can answer the questions in the room? To come back on what Benjamin just said on classification of structured data, we hope that it is less difficult today because when you create a database, you normally know within the project what kind of data typology you're going to process. And we have a way out because these structured data, well, in the end, are used in a non-structured way by a user, someone who receives an email, and the content of my structured database is not structured. And thanks to my classification tool, I will transform this data. So that's a safety net to intervene in the end. I would like to come back on the database issue. Of course, we control more today, but if it displays content because it hasn't been classified upstream, it might create a risk. Depends on the use case, yes. The issue there would be to be more safe, yes. I just wanted to add this. Of course, it was the idea. The idea is not to scare people. There is a prospect with AI to classify data. and then a final control for the user. If you do not tell them you have to classify your document, but when we record it, the proposal is to put confidential and to confirm it at that point. Maybe we will combine the best part of both worlds. Thank you, Mathieu. A comment? You talked about acceleration. Probably yes, but we shouldn't go too quickly because the analysis is important. Using areas could also be a way out. In terms of governance, the idea is to identify use case, to have the right sponsors, and use the right project, and not decide to classify everything in one go. The idea to say that I will do everything and it will solve everything, well, is not a solution. You have to reflect and be pragmatical in the way you will implement it. And it is a good idea to work in such a way. Our environment is not a finished one, so that's why a support of sponsors and managers are important. A final word, Christophe? If there is an end, I think we're rather at the beginning, at the start of something. I would like to come back on data and distributing rights. We are far from this possibility. But it intervenes on the data. It is absolutely clear, because you cannot count on humans for quality. Simon, a conclusion, very quickly? I would like to say that the legal aspect shouldn't be scary. It could become an asset. It's the OS code today, and legislator has a responsibility making sure that texts are standardizers and easier to implement in an AI to help classify data. I think that the European Commission, in terms of such rules, has this topic in mind, which is a good thing. Thank you so much for your interventions. I think there is hope. Some products, some new technologies will appear and help and be helpful. So we have some time for questions, so do not hesitate. Yes, one first question. I will repeat the question. The idea is, will AI classify data, the whole lifespan of the data? Well, that's an issue of classification processes, even before AI. How can I make sure my data can be updated and classified at the same time? The classification levels might change with time. Let's take intellectual property, for instance. So it's important to be able to trace and understand how data will be used, either according to the classification method, either with dates. That's where LLM, or I would rather say machine learning, will intervene and be able to detect in the document context that will help classify and go further than simpler rules. LLM, machine learning, will help us say that according to this or that date, I will reclassify the document. It is also related to one thing. Classification was something that was devolved to the user. Here, we're going to use AI system, very powerful ones, and each time that you have to pay for the cloud, well, it can become very expensive. So that's something you have to bear in mind. How will the system reflect the cost? A question at the end. The interpreters cannot translate if there is no microphone. Thank you. Two questions. First, is it a choice not to have an archivist in your panel? That's their jobs. You don't find many of them in companies, and that's maybe a key and a position to re-enter in companies. And a question to Christophe. You say that you worked with ACM in the past. On which resource you were able to use that? I would like to know what was the type of resources in relation to the types of data you have been using. And there might be a gap according to the thresholds. Beyond 70 billion, it may raise issues. Resources are higher with LCM than LLM. The learning curve is longer. I don't even talk about energy. I'm in IT. I cannot be an ecologist, an environmentalist. Yes, I agree with you. Resources are internal resources. And if you talk about the technical aspect, well, either you do an offline and we talk about it after the meeting. Okay, let's do this. Okay, perfect. As far as the creation of such models is concerned, NVIDIA has support programs. One is called NIM, that helps you create your own LLM premise system, and they have quite aggressive systems that help you think out of the box. I would like to come back on sovereignty. With Jonas, we have the resources and transparency that is very dear to my heart. Distributing, we do not want to share our data with the rest of the planet. Yes, an archive manager would be a good thing. It's quite interesting. Another question?
Because Christophe mentioned about the Cloud Act earlier, and you guys talk about GDPR. What is your view about the hyperscalers, AWS, etc., that are saying that they are sovereign clouds in Europe? I'd love to hear the French view on it.
Alors, c'est une question intéressante sur la manière dont les hyperscalers, les AWS, Google, Microsoft, etc., qui se présentent comme des acteurs.
That say, well, a little bit out of the framework.
Want you to cover that?
Alors, on va...
it remains French, but let's talk about the segment cloud. It's a French standard. When the company that offers the service is controlled by a company out of the EU, there is no sovereignty. That's the answer to your question. Very frankly, there is no European sovereignty when our data are processed by companies whose headquarters are based out of EU, be they Chinese or the US, etc. And I think the European Commission is very clear on that topic. We'll see in the future when Americans will intensify their threats on Europe. We'll see what the consequences will be. The European Commission is one thing, but we have to see the Cybersecurity European Agency. They are well aware that many things are currently happening. And if you want to see to what point take Microsoft, and you will see that it goes to Redmond, USA, and then comes back to Europe. That's Microsoft sovereignty. One last question? Yes? Hello, I had a question regarding no classification, but rather protection of data. We know that RGPD exists. Models are trained on public data without asking for any consent. My question would be, can we imagine RGPD changing either for more or less security? As a former member of the European Commission, I think RGPD2 is being prepared by ENISA and is tackling exactly that issue. So you'll have the answer in 5 years or in 3 years. Yes, the omnibus tech is an ongoing process. Then at European level, CNIL provides some elements saying how to adapt the RGPD reading of LLMs, but the trend is not towards because the data is public, it is public. How do you qualify data as such and how you were able to obtain it? And legislation is quite clear on that. And on the other side of the Atlantic, it is also reflected upon. We have to be very careful on what we put as training data within the models. Thank you so much for the exchanges and the questions we've asked. I would like to thank you all and wish you a very nice day and follow-up of the meeting.